All right, y'all. Welcome back to another Horror Joy Meet Your Maker. Today we are joined by somebody I have really enjoyed reading for a couple of years now. Since I found Mary, actually, it found me, I think. It was all over everywhere. Could not escape it, and I'm glad that that's true. Today we have Nat Cassidy with us. Nat, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh my God, my pleasure. It is a joy to be here. Thank you for having me.
We're excited to talk. I mean, you have so much stuff out there. Of course, Mary it felt like a smash hit. Again, it was everywhere. Picked it up and loved it. Nestling was great. And now we have When the Wolf Comes Home. And it's so good. I read it, devoured it, as it were, and just loved it. So thank you for your words. That's number one.
Oh, thank you. That's the most important part. Otherwise, these words would just be floating off into the ether.
Yeah, and you know what? I think it would be worth it. The ether would be appreciative. Yeah, we, here at Horror Joy, our guiding question, as it were, our the thing that keeps us going is this joyful sense, this experience of joy that we get while reading, watching, playing horror. And I have talked to a lot of people where people were like, that doesn't make sense, right? But here on Horror Joy, we have talked to lots of people where it does. And we want to know if that makes sense to you. So what do you see as the relationship between joy and horror? And yeah, it doesn't make sense.
It makes nothing but sense to me. And to the point where, even before I first listened to an episode of this show, I was like, I'm so glad that someone is pairing these two emotions, concepts, whatever you want to call them. Because to me, they're intricately linked. They are flip sides of the same coin. I mean, when you say joy to me, that evokes something that is beyond happiness. It's not just like simple enjoyment or something like that. There is an ecstatic sort of underpinning to the concept of joy to me. And horror is a similar thing. It is an ecstatic sort of reaction. They are both emotions in extremis. They are both intricately linked to mortality, I think, because you only get that sort of extremis, that extremity of feeling when there's something like really monumental occurring, whether it is a moment of bliss, of realizing like, oh my God, this is what it means to be alive. I'm so grateful to be alive. Or, oh my God, I'm so close to not being alive. I'm so terrified. And, generally speaking, horror can often be a feeling in retrospect. It's a feeling of survival. It's a feeling of, when you're actually like in the moment trying to survive a thing, you're kind of not feeling anything. And then you looking back on it, that's when the horror kind of fills you up with like, oh my God, that was such a traumatic, terrorizing experience. And joy, I think, is a similar thing. It is a thing that is sometimes it maybe not necessarily appreciated in retrospect, although sometimes I think we do realize, we were at our most joyful after the fact. But I'm rambling and maybe not sticking the landing of these thoughts as well as I could. Suffice it to say, I think they are both feelings that evoke the beautiful tenuousness of the mortal experience. We are given a limited amount of time, and we're given a limited amount of feeling. And sometimes that can be very horrifying, and sometimes that can be blissful, and you really don't get one without the other. I think, you know what it is? I think to me, horror as a genre is to storytelling what spicy foods are to the act of eating. And they can hurt, but they're also just like so goddamn joyful. Like the part of the joy is from the hurt, and that's what it means to be alive.
Someone who loves spicy food, that answer. You know what? Like we should we'll just change this to a Hot Ones episode right now.
Yeah,
start doing where that
just start like watching Martyrs or something like that.
Yeah, right. Exactly. At the same time. So we can, that'll be our next spinoff. We'll do spicy horror or something like that. Or like hot wings horror. I don't know. We'll workshop the name a bit. Now I'm sitting here looking at your bio on your webpage. It's extensive. You're not just an author, you are an actor, you are a playwright, you were commissioned by the Kennedy Center to write a short opera. Can you just tell us your origin story? How did you get into writing and acting and playwriting? But beyond that, within all of those things, it seems like you keep coming back to horror. So why is
Yeah, I mean they've both basically been around for as long as I've been conscious, as far as I'm aware. You know, I was always a macabre little kid. I loved anything having to do with spooky things, ghosts and goblins and monsters and whatnot. And I was always compelled to tell stories and write and confabulate and lie. And that all kind of merged when around, I was like 5 or 6 when I first started like really getting the acting bug. And I was, you know, a precocious little theater kid for most of my childhood. And at the same time, I was obsessed with Stephen King and, you know, the other like major horror iconography of the 80s when I was growing up. So I started like writing short stories and, you know, really abortive novel attempts at the same time. And it became like a sort of parallel track for both of them. I wanted to be an actor and I wanted to write scary stories. And it wasn't until I moved to New York in my 20s after I graduated college. And I went to, you know, an acting repertory conservatory, and I got my degree in classical acting, and I moved to New York to do classical acting. I wanted to do Shakespeare. I'd been obsessed with Shakespeare since I was about 6 because of the horror element of Shakespeare. It was learning the story of Macbeth that kind of wedded both sides of my brain, and I was like, oh, I can be on stage and I can murder a king. This is great. So I moved to New York to pursue classical acting, and had just kind of, you know, intermittently been pursuing short stories and writing and stuff like that, just kind of as the urge, you know, occurred to me. It wasn't really like a disciplined thing, and it was about like 3 or 4 years of pursuing classical theater in New York before I realized, oh, I hate classical theater. I don't want to pursue this anymore. At least as like a business model, I hated it. And for the first time, despite having like grown up reading scripts and doing scripts and grown up writing short stories and stuff like that, it never occurred to me to write plays before. So in my like mid-20s, I started writing plays, and because this was just all I cared about, they were mostly horror plays. The first plays that I wrote were to like give myself roles, and then I quickly realized that sucks. This is not enjoyable at all. I much preferred like directing and you know, shaping the script with someone else doing the roles. And so I kind of shifted gears and focused, you know, still doing acting work and taking acting gigs and stuff like that, but my primary focus then became being a playwright, and a horror playwright specifically. And then you'll notice a pattern here. After doing that for several years, I was like, oh wait, this also absolutely sucks as a business, and I cannot make a living. And the thing about playwriting too is like when you're in your 20s, the ephemerality of theater is so romantic and it's so wonderful. This thing will only exist for tonight only, or for as long as the run. What a beautiful artistic expression. And then when you start like actually trying to make a living and like build a portfolio, you're like, oh my God, this is an absolute nightmare. I need to work in a field where I can like hand someone something and not say like, oh, you should have seen it. It was great. Trust me. And I just so happened at the same time to like be feeling this itch to get back to novel writing and back to short stories and stuff like that. And a confluence of like business endeavors and other friends who were feeling the same sort of itch resulted in me starting an audio drama company with some dear friends who were also like genre playwrights at the time. And through our productions and stuff like that, people at Tor had been attending our plays and were fans of all of ours. This is way more in-depth a story than you probably wanted, but now I'm pot committed, so you're going to get the whole thing. They came to you know, a lot of our plays and stuff like that, and were like, we love you guys as storytellers, but we're book publishers. We can't do anything to help you guys. But when they found out we were starting an audio drama company, they were like, oh, we've also been wanting to get into the audio drama space. So we co-produced a sort of serialized sci-fi noir doomed romance audio drama with Tor that was called Steal the Stars, which I was in as an actor and helped produce, and then another brilliant playwright named Mac Rogers, who has like a benevolent stranglehold in the genre audio drama space because he's so goddamn good at it. He wrote the script for it, and Tor was like, hey, we want to release a novelization of this concurrent with the final episode. You guys don't have to worry about that. We'll find an actual author to do this, but we thought that would be cool. And I was like, wait, can I try? Like, can I audition for this novelization job? And they were like, I guess. So they made me write like a 20,000 word sort of sample of how I would do the novelization. And they were like, oh, okay, actually, yeah, you can do the job. And so it was like with that weird sort of merging of the playwriting and acting and just kind of general genre love, that's what landed me my first like actual book experience. And I wrote the novelization, and it did pretty well, and that gave me like an in with Tor, and kind of reminded me that, writing horror, writing genre prose has been there since the beginning. Like that was always it felt like the language that I grew up speaking, and I just hadn't spoken it for a while, and kind of everything just clicked. It was like all of these separate paths were kind of leading to this ultimate confluence anyway, and I haven't looked back since.
Yeah, we're grateful for that, I think, and I think to kind of bring some things together here, you were talking about the kind of the transience of live performance, and it made me think of silly ways. Kierkegaard talks about the experience of listening to his favorite music, and when I realized in my head that like, he heard that song maybe 3 times in his whole life, or 5 times, right? Because he had to hear it live. It like boggles my mind, right? But that sense of ecstasis that you're talking about, the standing outside of oneself, of being transported somewhere else, I think live music, live performances, they do this in a way that I think in many ways is different, right, than the written word. I want to transition really quickly here if I can. So there's all of that stuff, and you're welcome to respond. But in When the Wolf Comes Home, there's this conversation about lying, right, especially to a child, right? So the child plays a major role. And a lot of times when we talk to people, we're, I think, imagining, and I think that this way, right, that horror is a kind of truth-telling in a way. But Plato would also kick you out of the city because you're a professional liar in some way. And so just curious if you had thoughts about that relationship, especially given that I think the tension between truth and lying in this book is so present. If you had thoughts about like the relationship between kind of this truth, I'm revealing something in horror, but I'm also making this up, right? I'm inviting you in, but I'm also kind of telling you a lie in some way. Yeah, thoughts about that?
Yeah, I love that. I love it. I would push back against Plato for sure. Because I think in a way, horror,
yes,
like if you look at the sort of like, Platonic, what is it? What the analogy of the cave, the shadow on the cave wall and whatnot. Like, yes, the image could be construed as a lie. That could be construed as a confabulation of some sort. What the shape that you see on that wall might not actually be the shadow that is being cast. But I think with horror as a storytelling tradition, it's not always about the shape of the shadow. It's about the shadow itself. And that is not a lie at all. There is a shadow on that wall. And the shadow that is overcast on, for any horror story is the fact of death. It's the fact of the fragility of the mortal experience. So I think horror is in a lot of ways the ultimate truthful genre. Maybe the individual details of each story are technically fictive. The circumstances by which we are projecting the image are maybe not, a snapshot of reality, but the truth that is being conveyed, the shadow that is falling on the wall, regardless of the shape, is still 100% true. It is, in fact, so far as we know, the only truth that we really know, which is that we're all going to die. Maybe someone, maybe me, maybe you, maybe we'll be the exception, but we won't know till we get there. We're all immortal until we die. And so far, it seems like it's pretty 100% as far as death's success rate. So I think horror has been around for as long as it has been around. I mean, you look at our earliest storytelling traditions, and they're all, arguably horror stories. They're all, be it the Great Hunt or, look out for that monster over there. Like, it's all grounded in this attempt for storytelling to convey experiences that enrich us and edify us as a survival tactic. And I think one of the fundamental realities of any sort of survival tactic is you have to acknowledge what will happen if you fail, if what is on the other side of that tactic, if you don't employ that tactic. I think every horror story functions as a way to play act and to witness the various ways life can go wrong and things can go poorly. Again, this might be more elaborate of an answer than you were looking for, but I tend to look at we'll bring it back to Plato, every Platonic ideal of a horror fan is usually some combination of two facets, two elements, I think, make up a horror fan, an archetypal horror fan. One is anxiety. I think anyone who's drawn to the genre is naturally an anxious person because our minds are always thinking of the worst case scenario. But the flip side of that, or not the flip side, but the complementary side of that, because there are plenty of anxious people who actually hate horror because they don't want to they don't want to indulge the anxiety that they are trying to get out of. I think the complementary makeup of a horror fan is an innate sense of optimism. I think every horror fan, it's one of the reasons why horror fans are so lovely to be around and horror creators are so lovely to be around. There is a love of life. There is a joy innate to every horror fan because every horror story is in essence saying, here's what you have to do if you want to survive, or here's what you shouldn't do if you want to survive. And when we engage with these stories, there's a part of our brain that is constantly going okay, well, I wouldn't do that. And, let me have that feeling validated when I see why I wouldn't want to do that. Or, oh, that's maybe what I would do, and let's see how badly it goes for this character. So every horror story winds up becoming an engagement with worst case scenarios, and it winds up becoming this proactive sort of walking up to the thing that scares us and saying, I don't want to meet that fate. I want to learn what I can so that when this inevitably happens to me, when the bad thing inevitably happens to me, because I'm a very anxious person and I'm always waiting for that validation, I want to know how to be better prepared. So I think horror is very much an indulgence of truth that is very hard for a lot of other people to face. Every time you're engaging with a horror story, you're saying death is real and death can come for people that don't deserve it. So how can I arm myself with any sort of foreknowledge whatsoever?
Yeah, all of it was great. I mean, I just want to go back a second to your background with Shakespeare. Really, all horror. All of Shakespeare's tragedy is horror. It's Lear's psychological horror. Hamlet's a ghost story, and maybe also psychological horror, and also just misogynist horror and oligarchy, or I don't know what's happening in Hamlet sometimes. It's taken me a long time. I teach Shakespeare. That's part of my day job.
Oh yeah.
So
I've done Hamlet 5 times, so we can have a much longer conversation about Hamlet if you want.
We'll bring you back for the hot
Hamlet joy,
the spicy Hamlet joy. Yeah, absolutely. One thing I want to take a minute and play Brian and ask not the dumb philosopher question, but the dumb literary theory question. And I want to talk about semiotics because talking about Plato made me think about Saussure and thinking about how do we interpret signifier and sign in this book. When the wolf comes home, just there are so many things where Jess misreads a lot of signs. She thinks it signifies one thing, but it's actually signifying something entirely else. And I'm not going to give spoilers here, right? But I love how that drives this narrative where the entire, pretty much from the very beginning of the novel, just is kind of not great at reading what's going on around her, which is weird for someone who's a stand-up comedian because you think you'd be able to read the room. But just at times I'm just man, I maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think she's reading this correctly. So I just I appreciate how there's a sort of almost a dramatic irony about where we as a reader seem to almost at times to know more than Jess does as our protagonist, or who I would identify as our protagonist. So I don't know if any of that made any sense. You feel free to respond to any of it or just say next.
Never. That's the coward's way out. Well, I think it goes back to the earlier question too, which I am realizing now I failed to answer, which is the idea of lying and truth telling. I think the one of the fundamental elements of Jess that I really wanted to explore, and why it was so important to me that her background and her training is in comedy, and specifically in improv comedy, is, almost this idea, if we want to like zoom out a tiny bit, zoom out far enough where we see lit theory and philosophy hold hands, is that we're all just making it up as we go along. And that is all we can do, whether it's philosophy, whether it's theory, whether it's semiotics. It's all a search for meaning. And all of this meaning comes from this idea that, again, to put us right back in the cave, like we're all just in this very dark, monocular sort of existence. And we have a flashlight or a torch, and like all we have is what is lit in front of us. And, Jess is responding to everything in the moment as best she can. And I wanted to make sure that she has a training, a tradition of not stopping to ask, not being a Hamlet type character, specifically not. Like, she's not a detective. She's not a prevaricator. She's not thinking like, oh, before I, enact what I need to do next, let me gather all the information that I can. She's just like, oh, fuck, that thing? Okay, yes, and now what do I do? Because that's the only way you can survive. Like, Hamlet would not survive in this scenario, which is one of the things I love about the tragedies in particular. Like, the tragedies were always one of my favorites too, because they're horror stories, and also because I'm actually specifically, literally articulating this in the book that I'm currently writing. But the idea that, if Othello was in Hamlet, the story would go much different. And if Hamlet were in Othello, there would be no tragedy, because Hamlet would then be like investigating and trying to make sure that Iago wasn't doing the wrong thing. And Othello would just be like, oh yeah, Claudius killed my dad? Dead. Claudius is dead. Okay. Like, now what? These are all they're tragedies because of the protagonist's specific flaws. That's what makes them tragic. That's what makes them inevitable. And so for Jess, it is both her saving grace, it is her survival tools, and it is the thing that makes the situation infinitely worse, that she has these instincts to just play along with the kid, or to lie to the kid, or to not, stop for a second and be like, wait, what the fuck is actually happening? Like, let me plan this. It is entirely her instinct to just keep rolling forward with it and saying like, okay, this is now the thing I got to deal with. Great. I just got to get to the next punchline. I just got to get to the next sketch. And I think that is, to me, more accurate to what it is like to be alive than kind of anything else. That we're just constantly like, all right, now I've got this series of experiences that are informing me, and what do I do? Stimulus response. Okay, now I'm bringing that baggage to the next thing, and it's informing me in ways that maybe I'm not aware of, but like anyone watching my life would be like, oh, dude, you're just doing that thing again. Like, maybe don't fall into those patterns. But we never have the blessing of that sort of perspective. So yeah, maybe it seems a little haughty to say like, and that's why my novel When the Wolf Comes Home is a true representation of what it means to be alive in a tradition of existential literature. But that's kind of how I approach it. Like, I think that's part of the fun of what horror allows us to do, is to kind of, again, that sort of ecstasis, that sort of ecstatic sort of embodiment of the extremity of human experience can kind of get you to truths that maybe a more placid story probably wouldn't allow you to get to. I don't know. Was that a little too self-righteous?
No, I think that was awesome, and it leads me to this next question about. So I was thinking about anxiety and fear, right? And in the story, there's also this relationship between, okay, we have a kid and we have Jess, and they're on the run. We won't get into spoilers, but it's a really cool kind of on the run part of the story. But in many ways, it feels as though the kid is full of fear, right? And there's a lot of conversation, a lot of rumination about fear. But there's also this conversation about when you get older, that fear turns into anxiety, because you're not worried about the one thing, you're worried about all the things, right? And the collapse of a thing into fear seems like it would have allowed Jess to say, oh, there's this one thing, we're afraid of it, and how do we respond to that one thing? And instead, she's responding to all of it. And I think that there's a sense in which, right, so Jess, as that flashlight you're talking about, is revealing the world for herself. But other people are both revealing and concealing alongside her, right? So her mom is there, her dad is there, her friend is there from the or where she works, all of that. And I guess the real question is about this idea of fear and anxiety, and like you were talking about, truth as flowing from horror, truth as flowing from fiction. It's also a revealing and concealing. What you're giving to us is a revealing and concealing of the world around us. It's showing us what is or could be, but it's also saying we're going to put this part away, right? So the rambling question here is just your thoughts, right, generally, and how you were approaching fear and anxiety in this book. Separate things, like kind of a lead from one to the other, or how you approached it.
There's a story or an analogy that I wish I could remember, and it's dancing on the tip of my brain, and I can't. And it involves like a mantis head, and that is it's like a psychological analogy, basically, of how anxiety functions as like a putting on a mantis head, and something gets. I think it's just cloudy enough that I'm like, oh, the more succinct answer to your question is in that parable, and I can't find it right now. So, in the absence of that, I think, yeah, this book for me was kind of I wanted to use it as an arena in which I could inform myself the relationship between anxiety and fear as someone who was a terrified little kid and who grew up into an anxious adult. Because I find it to be very poignant and very fascinating that they're the same thing. Like, it's just that kids tend to be afraid of external threat. They're very small, they're very vulnerable, and they're afraid of the thing with teeth and with claws that is in the shadows or is under the bed. That obviously comes from a very evolutionary, primal sort of place where, like, that's what enables us to stay alive. Even insects will run from a boot. Like, they are afraid of, they don't want to die. And if little kids didn't have that encoded in them, we wouldn't have made it as a species, because we would have just, like, walked into the fucking saber-tooth mouth. So we're just, like, evolved to be constantly on alert, as we have no way to fight back at that age. And then the older we get, it's not like the limbic system is like, well, don't need those feelings anymore, I'm just going to stick those in storage. They're like, all right, well, now I have all of this fear floating around, but I am a little more rational about the world. So I'm going to now be afraid if I'm going to turn into my parents. Or I'm going to be afraid about what the doctor is going to say. And maybe that'll mean I'll never go to the doctor. Or I'm going to be afraid about, this thing and just be paralyzed by it. I'm going to take that really concentrated external fear, and I'm going to chop it up into all these little bits and spread it throughout my system so that I never feel rest again. And it's so contrary to a livable stasis in a lot of ways, especially for people who have, an imbalance of some sort with their relationship to anxiety. And it reminds me in a lot of ways of physical pain. Physical pain exists to alert us that there is a threat to, our actual, corporeal well-being. Like, ow, take that thing out, or something is broken in there. But after a certain point, it's like, okay, message received. I can't do anything about it right now, so maybe stop making life miserable. Like, I will get that checked out as soon as I can, but, like, I can't address it right now. Our alert systems tend to go haywire. And so, like, I find it to be a really poignant thing that, the anxiety that we develop as adults, as survivors, as people who have lived for a certain amount of time, is there to protect us, but it winds up getting in the way a lot of the time. And it is the challenge of most people's lives, I would imagine, to find a better relationship with that that internal sort of fear. And so that's what I wanted this book to be. I wanted it to be, almost literally a dialogue between the kid version of fear and the adult version of fear. And what can we learn from each? And, like, is there a way to find stasis? Is there a way to find a way to honor the necessity of both of those phenomena, but also not let either consume us? And, for those who have read the ending, that's kind of where that ending is posing, is a question as to whether or not that really is possible. And I've really enjoyed how the ending sort of leaves it up to the individual to kind of metabolize. Like, it's an ambiguous ending in a way, but I think it's also a very going back to the shadows on the wall again. It just kind of depends on what you see. It's less an ambiguous ending and it's more of an interpretive ending, I think.
I mean, I love this idea of having the two types of fear in conversation. I think it really succeeds at doing that. I don't really have a question. I have more of a comment. If this at any point is optioned, and you're looking at Act 4 Jessa, Hannah Einbinder, who plays Ava in the series Hacks. So, like, I feel like there's something about, I don't know, maybe it's just me. So take that or leave it for what it's worth. We're getting towards the end of our time together, so I want to move to one of our questions. What's bringing you joy in horror? I mean, it seems like everything in horror brings you joy, which is fantastic. So, like, we are all cut from the same cloth, as it were, here in this call. But, like, what specifically, maybe movies or books or video games, board games, if you happen to play plays, like what types of horror right now are bringing Nat Cassidy joy?
I mean, you're so right. Like, it all is. I have loved obviously on a professional level, but also just as like a compatriot level, the moment that horror is having as a commercially viable genre. I hope it never ends. I know it will at some point because I've lived through several cycles of it myself, but I hope it doesn't end for as long as possible. And it's been, especially in this particular moment, the sort of diversity of perspective and experience and background has enriched the genre to, like, you know, an inestimable extent. Like, it's been incredible to witness and be a part of, and just as, like you were saying, like, anyone who loves horror right now, I think is just like, we're pigs at the trough. Like, it's great. I love it. And I, you know, specifically in this moment too, I love that it seems like we are entering a moment where that specificity of experience and perspective and background, you know, the rich sort of diversity of what horror can do and who horror can be about and who horror can be for, is also, you know, that's been happening for a few years now. And I think there, you know, as happens with any sort of artistic movement, a little bit of like restlessness comes in of like, okay, well, we've done that. Like, what can we add to this? And so that specificity is also meeting what feels like a very like maximalist approach. And so we're getting things like weapons is like, you know, that's an allegory for school shootings. It's not like we're moving past like horror as a serious vehicle right now, but it's also just like so gonzo, so unapologetically gonzo. It's exactly what I was trying to do with Wolf as well. Or, you know, even something like Smile. Smile felt like it was a sort of bridge between, like, you know, this is very explicitly, almost satirically, an embodiment of horror as trauma. Like, it's all about trauma, and it's all about, you know, the face we must put on in society, despite the fact that, like, we're all screaming inside. But at the same time, it was just, like, so unapologetically fucking poppy. It was just like a horror pop song. And so I love this moment right now that it seems like we're getting really comfortable with letting horror be big and bold and unapologetic, but also still serious. Like I'm also a massive music freak and music snob, and you know, especially about like classic rock and things like that. And it feels like, sometimes it really feels like we're in like the late 60s of horror right now, or even the early 70s, where like it is still pop. It is still catchy and delightful, and for all audiences. You don't have to be a connoisseur to appreciate the sophistication at play, but that sophistication is still there. Like, it is still like, you know, that Beatles song is still kind of like an interpolation of Moonlight Sonata being played backwards, and it's got an Aeolian cadence and stuff like that. And wow, isn't that sophisticated? But it's still just a fucking 3-minute pop song, and like, you know, kids will enjoy it. Like, there's a simplicity to it that doesn't belie the sophistication, and that is so fun. Like, I can't wait to see how much weirder and bigger and bolder things are going to get.
I love that. Thank you, Nat. Nat, you've revealed to us very clearly that just artistically you're good at so many things. I was listening a little bit to Nat Cassidy and the Nines before we jumped on. Good at singing, playing guitar. I don't know why The Simpsons haven't called you for your voice acting. It just feels like you fit.
I'm right here,
in
Matt
there.
Groening.
Honestly, Matt Groening. I don't know what you're doing, but this is what you should be doing. Novels are great. Reading your plays, like the descriptions of your plays, I'm just like, I wish we could have those on repeat if it were possible. But all that to say, I also think maybe you're better at anxiety than us two, having written it out so clearly in the novel. But just want to say thank you for taking the time, for talking horror and writing and joy with us today.
Thank you guys. Thanks for having me anytime. As I'm sure you can already sense, I could talk about this stuff all day.
Yeah, I think we could too. But I think for now, we're going to leave it at that, revealing and concealing, as it were. Thank you again. And as always, folks, find joy, even in horror. This has been an episode of Horror Joy, produced in conjunction with Axis Mundi Media. Thanks for joining us. We want to hear from you. You can find us at Horror Joy Pod on Instagram or at Horror Joy Pod on YouTube. You can also email us at horrorjoypod@gmail.com, all one word. And you can, of course, find us wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a like, subscribe, leave a review. Until next time, remember, seek joy, even in horror.